Denise Carter had only $6. 42 Carters in her bank account the morning she walked through the glass doors of St. Mary's Children's Hospital to donate blood again. Outside, Atlanta was covered in cold rain, the kind of thin but stubborn rain that soaked her old shoes and made the hem of her uniform pants cling to her ankles. Denise had worked the night shift at a motel off the highway, cleaning 17 rooms, changing 17 sets of sheets, then taking 2 buses to get here before her shift in the hospital kitchen. She had not eaten breakfast. In her coat pocket, she had only a broken piece of soft candy and a bus card that was almost out of money. The woman at the registration desk looked up at her, her eyes settling on Denise's tired face and hands that trembled slightly from the cold. "Are you sure you still want to donate today?" she asked softly. Denise pulled the zipper of her coat a little higher and tried to smile as if the rain outside was nothing worth mentioning. "Maybe somebody needs it more than I do," she said. No one in that small room knew that on the 6th floor, a 9-year-old boy named Caleb Bennett was lying amid the steady beeping of monitors, his skin pale beneath the white lights of the hospital room. Beside his bed, Marcus Bennett stood silently in an expensive suit wrinkled at the elbows, his eyes red from many sleepless nights. He was a man who could buy an entire building, hire the best doctors, and call a private jet within an hour. But that morning, all his money could buy him was one sentence of waiting from the doctor. "We've just found a compatible donor, Doctor," Elaine Mercer said. Marcus turned around quickly. "Who?" The doctor looked at him with gentle but firm eyes. "I can't disclose the donor's identity." Down on the ground floor, Denise sat down in the pale blue blood donation chair and rolled up her sleeve, unaware that the blood quietly leaving her body was about to go to a child she had never met, in a room she would one day only pass by like an invisible employee. After donating blood that morning, Denise Carter did not lie down to rest for long like the others. She quickly drank the carton of orange juice the nurse handed her, slipped the small packet of crackers into her coat pocket, and stood up before the dizziness had fully faded. In the restroom mirror of the blood donation center, she saw her eyes red from lack of sleep, her low bun slightly messy after a night of work, and her old coat worn thin at the cuffs. She pressed her cold hands against her face for a few seconds, as if that alone could pull her back into the long day ahead. Then she changed into her pale gray kitchen uniform, pinned the name tag, Denise Carter, over the left side of her chest, and stepped into the back hallway of the hospital, where the smell of antiseptic mixed with the smell of hot soup from the morning kitchen. Denise did not have many things she could call her own. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor of an old building in South Atlanta, where the living room window looked out over a cracked parking lot and a streetlight that flickered every time it rained. On the small dining table, there was always a stack of bills neatly held together with a rubber band. Rent, electricity, medicine for her mother, Ruth, who had not been able to walk steadily since a mild stroke the year before. Every evening after her shift at the hospital, Denise would run to the motel off the highway to clean rooms until almost midnight. She wiped sinks stained with strangers' toothpaste, gathered wet towels from the floor, changed sheets in silence, then returned home when the whole city had gone quiet except for the distant sound of trucks on the highway. And yet, every time the hospital called, she still came back. Not because anyone promised to pay her. Not because she hoped that one day some rich person would step out and thank her. She came back because, many years earlier, her younger brother had once lain in a hospital room with dry lips and tiny hands gripping their mother's hand. Back then, Denise was only 16, too young to understand the medical terms, but old enough to remember her mother's face every time the doctors said they were still waiting for compatible blood. Her brother did not survive. And from that day on, Denise had always believed that if her body could give someone one more morning, she would not hold it back just because she was tired. In the hospital kitchen, The shift manager, Vanessa Cole, did not see it that way. Vanessa was the kind of woman who always walked fast, spoke in short sentences, and treated every delay like an excuse. When Denise came in 7 minutes late after donating blood, Vanessa stood beside the food tray cart, arms crossed, looking her up and down. "Denise, you can't keep switching shifts, asking for time off, and then coming back as if this whole place is supposed to feel sorry for you," she said, loud enough for 2 dishwashers nearby to hear. Denise bent down to tie her shoelace, her hands still trembling slightly. "I'll make up my part," she said softly. Vanessa curled her lip, her voice as cold as the door of a walk-in freezer. "You know, you can't save the whole world on minimum wage." Denise did not answer. She only pulled the tray cart out of the kitchen and moved through the long hallway, brightening under the hospital lights. Far ahead, the elevator opened onto the pediatric floor, and for one very brief moment, she heard a child laughing behind the door of some hospital room. Denise paused for half a beat, not knowing why that sound made her chest soften. Then she kept walking, completely unaware that the laughter belonged to the boy her blood had just saved. That laughter followed Denise throughout the entire morning, slipping in between the sound of metal wheels, rolling over tile floors, and the soft clatter of food tray lids touching one another. She did not know why she remembered it. In a children's hospital, the sound of children crying, parents whispering prayers, and nurses calling to one another over walkie-talkies were all familiar sounds. But that laughter was different, fragile, like a small lamp that had just been turned on in a room that had been dark for far too long. Denise heard it for only 1 second, then the elevator doors closed, carrying her down to the kitchen level where the soup pots were boiling and the list of meals to deliver was still as long as it was every day. On the 6th floor, Caleb Bennett was sitting propped up against his pillows, his thin legs covered beneath a sky-blue blanket. Color had returned to his cheeks, not much, but enough to make Marcus Bennett turn away from the window for a moment to hide his wet eyes. On the small table beside the bed were a box of crayons, a few sheets of drawing paper, and a plastic dinosaur that had lost one leg and that Caleb absolutely refused to let anyone throw away. The boy held a red crayon, drawing a small figure with a cape flying behind him, then looked up at Dr. Mercer with a voice that was still weak but full of curiosity. "Is the person who gave me blood a superhero?" Dr. Mercer smiled and pulled a chair down to his eye level. "Maybe not the kind of superhero who wears a cape," she said. "But that person did something very brave." Caleb looked down at the paper, thinking for a long time, as if even a 9-year-old child understood that there were gifts you could not buy in a store. Then he wrote in slanted handwriting, "Thank you for helping me breathe better." He folded the paper and handed it to Nurse Angela Reed when she came in to check the IV machine. "Can you give this to that person?" Angela held the card, her throat tightening. She knew the rules. She knew she could not give out a name, could not connect 2 lives just because her heart wanted her to. "I'll keep it safe," she said, and placed the card inside a blank white envelope with no name on it. That afternoon, when Denise returned to the 6th floor to collect meal trays, Angela was standing at the nurse's station, her hand resting on that very envelope. Denise walked past her, gave her a tired smile, then kept pushing the cart toward the end of the hallway. Only a few steps away from her, behind the door of room 612, Caleb was sleeping more peacefully than he had in any night for weeks. In room 612, Caleb slept with one hand resting lightly on the one-legged plastic dinosaur, his breathing lighter, steadier, as if his small body had finally been allowed to rest after days of fighting. Marcus Bennett sat beside the bed, not opening his phone, not answering messages, not looking at the pile of emails building up from the company. Out there, his name appeared in business magazines, on conference screens, in articles about million-dollar deals. But in this white room smelling of antiseptic, Marcus was only a father afraid to hear the monitor change its rhythm. When Dr. Mercer came in to check the results, Marcus stood up immediately. He was used to giving orders, used to solving problems with signatures, with money, with phone calls in the middle of the night. But his voice now was low and hoarse, almost pleading. If that donor is so important, I can fund the entire program. I can bring in more specialists. I can pay any cost. Dr. Mercer looked at Caleb sleeping, then looked at Marcus with the tired compassion of someone who had been forced to tell the truth too many times. Mr. Bennett, money can buy better equipment, a better private room, better doctors, she said slowly. But money can't create the right person at the right time. That sentence left Marcus silent. For the first time, in many years, he understood what it felt like to stand before a door his fortune could not open. Down on the ground floor, the woman who had helped that door crack open was washing food trays in the hot kitchen, her legs aching, unaware that the most powerful man in the hospital was praying for her to come back again if his son needed her. The blood donations that followed were no longer a coincidence. 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Then many months passed, and each time the blood center called, and the file showed she was eligible to return. Denise would rearrange her shifts, take the bus to the hospital, then quietly leave before anyone could ask too much. She did not know the child's name. Marcus did not know hers either, but for nearly 2 years there was an invisible thread between them. Tied together each time, Caleb made it through another difficult night. Denise returned to the hospital many times. Sometimes she came in the rain. Sometimes she switched shifts. Sometimes she skipped breakfast. Sometimes Caleb felt better after a transfusion. Marcus still did not know who was helping his son. Nearly 2 years later, on a rainy late October afternoon, the hospital kitchen was sweltering with steam from the large soup pots. Denise stood by the sink, her hands submerged in soapy water, her back aching dully after a sleepless night and a morning blood donation. She was moving more slowly than usual, not because she was lazy, but because every time she bent down, her vision went dark for a few seconds. When the last tray cart was finally pushed into the hallway, Denise had to brace one hand against the wall to keep her balance. It was only a single moment, but Vanessa Cole saw it. She walked over very quickly, her shoes clicking sharply against the tile floor, her voice cold and loud enough to make several nearby employees turn around. "Denise, if you're too weak to work, then don't take the shift. We can't keep carrying your work, because you want to play the good person." The air around the hallway seemed to freeze. A young employee lowered his eyes to the food tray. Someone else pretended to check the room delivery list. Denise straightened up, her lips dry, her hands still marked with traces of water. She did not argue. She was too used to people seeing the uniform before they saw the person inside it. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I'll finish the work." Vanessa curled her lip. Saving strangers doesn't pay your rent. At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened at the end of the hallway. Marcus Bennett stepped out with Dr. Mercer, still wearing the wrinkled suit from long hours in the hospital room. He heard the final sentence clearly. His eyes stopped on Denise, then dropped to the small name tag on her chest. Denise Carter. The name still meant nothing to him, but her tired face and dignified silence made Marcus stand still longer than usual. Marcus said nothing. At that moment. He only looked at Denise for one more second, then followed Dr. Mercer toward room 612, where Caleb was waiting for him with a weak smile and the superhero drawing beside his pillow. But the image of the woman in the kitchen uniform stayed in his mind longer than he wanted to admit. There was something in the way she endured the insult without letting her back bend that made Marcus uneasy, as if he had just walked past a very small injustice, but one deep enough to cling to his conscience. That night, the hospital changed color. The hallways that were bright white and clean during the day suddenly felt colder under the night shift lights. Near midnight, the monitor in Caleb's room began sounding urgent alarms. The boy curled up in bed, his breathing short and rapid, while Marcus stood frozen beside him as the nurses rushed in. Dr. Mercer checked the results, her face tightening. Caleb needed compatible blood immediately, and the nearest reserve supply would not arrive fast enough. At the nurse's station, Angela Reed looked at the donor file, her hand stopping on a familiar name, Denise Carter. She knew Denise had just worked 2 shifts in a row. She knew Denise had no strength left. But she also knew Caleb did not have much time. Angela picked up the phone, her voice trembling when the call connected. "Denise," she said softly, "it's the same child. We need you tonight." On the other end of the line, Denise did not answer right away. She was standing in the laundry room of the motel off the highway, with a dryer rumbling loudly in front of her and a cart still piled high with white towels. The clock on the wall read 12:17. Her feet hurt so badly that every step felt like stepping on stones, and in her coat pocket she had only a few coins left, barely enough to buy a cheap cup of coffee at the gas station. But when Angela said it was the same child, Denise closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she did not see the rent money, did not see Vanessa, did not hear the mocking words from the hospital hallway. She only saw her younger brother years ago, lying small beneath a white blanket, waiting for someone out there to arrive in time. "I'm coming right now," Denise said. The last bus had left the stop 10 minutes earlier. Denise put on her coat, stepped into the cold night, and walked along the wet road under yellow streetlights. A familiar bus driver recognized her at the corner and let her on, even though his route was nearly finished. When Denise walked into the hospital, her hair was wet with mist, her lips pale, but her voice was still calm. "If I'm eligible," she said to Angela, "take whatever you're allowed to take. Just tell me I got here in time." The file showed that today was the first day Denise was eligible to donate again. Denise was taken into the small blood donation room at the end of the hallway, where the white light fell across her tired face and made the droplets still clinging to her hair sparkle like mist. Angela placed a thin blanket over her shoulders, trying to hide her worry behind the familiar calm of a night shift nurse. Denise leaned back in the chair, looked up at the ceiling, and listened to the sound of hurried footsteps outside and the overhead speaker calling an emergency doctor. She did not ask the child's name. She did not ask who his family was. She did not ask whether anyone would remember her after tonight. She only turned to Angela, her voice hoarse from the cold and exhaustion. "Please tell me I got here in time." Angela gently held her hand. "You got here in time." When the first bag of blood was rushed up to the 6th floor, Marcus Bennett was standing outside Caleb's room, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Dr. Mercer walked past him, followed by a nurse carrying a medical transport cooler. Marcus looked at that cooler as if he were looking at a miracle sealed inside cold plastic. A few minutes later, the monitor in Caleb's room began to steady. The alarms slowly faded. The hallway fell quiet. Marcus rested his forehead against the glass doorframe and breathed out like a man who had just been pulled back from the edge of a cliff, still unaware that the woman lying downstairs was Denise Carter. When Caleb stabilized, Marcus did not step into his son's room right away. He stood in the hallway, one hand resting on the glass frame, watching Caleb's small chest rise and fall steadily, as if every breath were a gift that had just been returned from the darkness. Dr. Mercer stood beside him, silent for a long time before, finally saying that the blood donor had agreed to let the hospital reveal her identity. Marcus turned back, his eyes still red from fear. "Can I meet that person?" She led him downstairs to the small blood donation room, where Denise Carter was sitting with a thin blanket over her shoulders, both hands wrapped around a carton of orange juice, her face pale from exhaustion. Marcus stopped at the doorway. He recognized her before the doctor could say a word. The woman who had been scolded in the hallway. The woman in the kitchen uniform. The woman he had walked past without knowing his son was alive because of her. In that moment, every title, every dollar, and every piece of power Marcus Bennett had became small. He stepped in front of Denise, his voice breaking. "You saved my son." Denise looked at him, tired but calm. "I only did what I could." Caleb handed her the old card himself. "Thank you for helping me breathe better." Denise cried. Not because she had met a billionaire, but because the nameless child from the past 2 years finally had a face, a voice, and a life that was still going on. Marcus wanted to give Denise money right away, but she only shook her head. She did not want to turn what she had done into a debt. A few weeks later, Marcus created a fund to support patients with rare blood needs and scholarships for low-income hospital employees who wanted to enter the medical field. The first person to receive that opportunity was Denise Carter. The woman who had once said Denise could not save the world on minimum wage now lowered her head because the whole hallway knew Denise had saved one small world named Caleb. The lesson of this story is this: true kindness does not need to know who receives it. Sometimes the smallest thing you quietly give away becomes the greatest miracle in someone else's life.